It was just another quiet night at John's house, still, peaceful, and utterly uneventful. The kind of night where everything seems to be in its place and the world outside feels distant, almost unreachable. But that peace would shatter with one simple sound. A loud, sharp knock echoed through the hallway, startling John from his thoughts. His heart skipped a beat. Who could be at the door at this hour? It was already past midnight, and the streets were empty. He moved toward the door, his mind racing with questions, but none of the answers came. Was it a friend, a neighbor in need of help, or was it something else entirely? Milo, his loyal French bulldog, sensed the change in the air before John even reached for the door. The little dog, who normally lay sprawled out on the couch, stood up immediately, ears perked. His body tensed, muscles coiled with a low growl that vibrated in his chest. It was a soft sound, not a threatening bark, but it carried a weight of unease, like a warning. Milo wasn't the type to get alarmed easily, but something about this moment made him uneasy. He knew something wasn't right. John paused at the door. The growl continued, a subtle but steady rumble that made his skin prickle with unease. His hand hovered over the doorknob, his breath held tight in his chest. What was going on? Who would come knocking at this time of night? His eyes flicked down to Milo, who had now positioned himself directly in front of him, like a guardian, blocking his path. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down, as if everything was waiting for the next move. The knock came again, louder this time, more urgent. John's heartbeat quickened. He turned the knob, the sound of the door opening seeming far too loud in the stillness of the night. As the door creaked open, Milo stood firm, his low growl now unmistakable, his eyes never leaving the shadowy figure on the other side. And there it was, the twist. A figure standing in the darkness, their face obscured, but the desperation in their voice was unmistakable. A stranger? No, not just a stranger. Whoever this was, something in the air told John that this was only the beginning. And Milo, ever the protector, seemed to know it too. John's heart was racing as he stood there, his hands still gripping the doorknob. The figure at the door, now clearer in the dim light, was no longer just a shadow. The man, disheveled and visibly shaken, was gasping for breath, his eyes wide with panic. His clothes were torn, his hair matted with sweat, and his face was smeared with dirt, as if he'd been running for hours. The man looked like someone who had been through hell, and in that moment, it wasn't hard to believe. "Please, you have to help me," the man gasped, his voice hoarse and filled with desperation. "I'm being followed. They'll find me. You have to let me in." John stood frozen for a heartbeat, unsure of how to react. His instinct screamed at him to close the door, to stay safe, to ignore the stranger. But something about the man's eyes, wild, desperate, tugged at something deep within him. He wanted to help, but at the same time his mind screamed for caution. He didn't know this man. Who was he? What was he running from? Milo, who had been quietly observing the situation from John's side, took a small, cautious step forward. He wasn't growling now. Instead, his small body seemed to soften, as if sensing something John couldn't yet understand. With a gentle nudge against John's leg, Milo glanced up at him, his brown eyes full of trust and curiosity. It was as if the little dog was silently urging him to listen, to consider the stranger's plea. John's gaze dropped to Milo, and for a moment everything else in the world seemed to fade away. Milo had always been more than just a pet. He was a companion, a friend, and John had learned to trust his instincts in ways he never expected. The dog's calm demeanor, despite the stranger's panic, reminded John of his own need to trust in the world, in people, and in this moment. The stranger's breath was ragged now, his hands pressed against the doorframe as if he might collapse at any second. "Please," he repeated, his voice more urgent now. "They're close, I don't have much time." John hesitated. Milo's gentle nudge was the only reassurance he needed. With a deep breath, John stepped aside and motioned for the man to come in. But as the door creaked open wider, John couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. What had he just agreed to? As the stranger crossed the threshold into the house, the door clicked shut behind him, leaving John standing in the dimly lit hallway, his mind racing. The urgency in the man's voice still echoed in his ears, but now, inside the safety of his home, things seemed to settle, at least on the surface. Milo, who had been standing protectively beside John, was the first to break the stillness. The French Bulldog, despite the tension in the air, didn't hesitate. With cautious steps, he approached the stranger, his small body moving gracefully across the floor. He stopped just short of the man's feet, sitting down on his haunches and looking up at him with those large, soulful eyes. The stranger, who had been visibly on edge just moments ago, instinctively took a step back. His eyes flicked down at the dog, unsure of what to make of Milo's presence. But Milo wasn't a threat. With a soft, almost playful huff, he stretched out his nose and gave the stranger's hand a tentative sniff. The man's stiff posture softened slightly, and his breath, still shaky, seemed to slow as he observed the small dog. Milo's curiosity was calm, unhurried, a quiet invitation for the man to relax. It was as though the little dog, with his gentle manner, was offering reassurance, a silent message that it was okay to let go of the fear that had gripped him since the knock on the door. The stranger slowly extended his hand, trembling slightly as if unsure of what to expect. But Milo, ever the charmer, took the chance to nuzzle his hand, his warm, soft fur brushing against the stranger's fingers. The man, still wary but now visibly easing, let out a soft chuckle, the sound tentative at first, as though he hadn't laughed in a long time. For a moment, the tension in the room dissipated, replaced by something lighter, a momentary comfort in the presence of the dog. Milo, sensing the man's gradual shift, gave a playful, gentle lick to his hand, as if to further break down the walls of distrust. The stranger's guard lowered even more. A light smile flickered on his face, a rare expression, as the dog's natural adaptability took center stage, his innocence and playfulness unknowingly bridging the gap between fear and comfort. In that instant, John saw something different in the stranger's eyes. The rigid mask of tension, the panic, the desperation, all of it was fading, slowly replaced by a subtle sense of trust, all because of a dog's ability to adapt, to offer comfort in a moment of uncertainty. Milo had, in his own way, started to change the course of the night simply by being himself. And in that moment, John knew that no matter what happened next, Milo would be his steadfast ally, guiding them both through whatever the night had in store. The air inside the house grew heavier, and an unsettling silence settled in. As the man, still catching his breath, took a seat on the couch, John's mind raced. The stranger's words, frantic, desperate, echoed in his ears, but there was something else now. A subtle shift. The atmosphere outside seemed too quiet, too still. John couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. His eyes darted toward the windows. The streetlights outside flickered in the distance, their light casting long, eerie shadows across the lawn. It was as if the night had suddenly become a living thing, waiting, watching. He couldn't see anyone out there, but his gut told him that something was wrong. Milo, who had been quiet for a moment, sensed it too. The little dog, who had been so playful and carefree earlier, now stood rigidly by John's side. His ears were perked up, his body low to the ground. His eyes flicked back and forth between the windows, his usual calm demeanor replaced with an almost primal alertness. The dog's stance was unmistakable. He was ready for whatever was coming. John's heart rate quickened. He instinctively moved toward the front door, his fingers brushing over the locks, one by one, ensuring each one was secure. A chill ran down his spine as the uncertainty grew. He could feel his paranoia tightening like a vice around his chest, but Milo's presence offered some small comfort. The dog stayed close, his body pressed against John's leg, a silent promise of protection. Despite the uncertainty of the situation, John found himself looking down at Milo, seeking reassurance, as though the little dog had the answers. The shadows outside seemed to shift with every passing second. John couldn't tell if it was his mind playing tricks on him or if something truly was out there. The night had turned ominous, and the quiet hum of the world around them felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As John glanced at Milo once more, the dog's steady gaze met his. There was no doubt in John's mind now. Milo wasn't just a pet. He was more than that. Milo was his protector, and in this moment, with danger lurking just beyond the door, John knew that whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. The tension in the room was suffocating. John paced back and forth, his mind whirling with the uncertainty of what was happening outside. His hands gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white with the effort. Every creak of the house felt amplified. Every shadow outside seemed darker. The paranoia that had taken root in his chest was tightening, squeezing out all logic, all clarity. He could feel his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Milo, ever the perceptive dog, had not left his side. The little French bulldog, normally playful and carefree, had sensed the shift in John's demeanor. His sharp instincts told him that something was wrong, but he also knew that he had a role to play here. And it wasn't to be just a protector. It was to be the bridge back to normalcy, to the comfort of the life they both shared. Without warning, Milo leapt up onto the couch, his small paws landing softly on the cushions. He trotted over to John, who was still lost in his spiraling thoughts, and nudged at his leg with his snout. When John didn't react, Milo tried again, this time jumping up and nipping gently at the hem of John's socks. It was a playful gesture, the kind of action that usually brought a smile to John's face. John froze. For a moment, he didn't know whether to be frustrated or amused. But then, he felt it. Milo's playful nudge broke through the wall of fear that had built around him. The absurdity of the moment, the dog's innocent and cheerful attempt to snap him out of his head, made him laugh. It wasn't a deep belly laugh, but a light, almost surprised chuckle. And just like that, the air felt lighter. John looked down at Milo, whose eyes shone with mischief and affection. The little dog didn't care about the danger, about the unknown lurking outside. His only concern was his owner, and right now his job was to make John smile, to bring him back from the edge of anxiety. And for a brief moment, it worked. John breathed in deeply, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The tension in his shoulders eased just a fraction. Milo had done it again. He'd reminded John to breathe, to live in the moment, and to trust in the bond they shared. Milo nipped at his socks once more, this time with even more enthusiasm, as if saying, "See, it's okay. You've got this." And in that simple, playful moment, John realized Milo was right. He wasn't alone. The laughter that had briefly lifted the tension in the room was quickly replaced by silence. John, still processing the playful interruption, noticed the man on the couch. The stranger, his face lined with exhaustion, looked lost in thought. His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together in his lap, a visible sign of the strain he'd been under. His breath, though steadier now, still carried the weight of fear. "I didn't want to involve anyone," the stranger muttered, his voice quieter now, strained with the burden of his story. "But I have no choice. You deserve to know who I am." John, standing nearby, instinctively looked down at Milo, who had nestled closer to the stranger. The little dog, once playful, now seemed to sense the man's inner turmoil. Milo's small body sat with quiet dignity, offering a soft comfort, his presence grounded and steady. The man's gaze shifted to Milo, as if the dog's calmness had pulled him back to the moment. With a slow, hesitant movement, the stranger reached out a hand, not sure whether Milo would accept him. To his surprise, Milo leaned in, nudging his palm with his soft nose, as if saying, "I'm here." The stranger's shoulders relaxed as he lightly scratched Milo behind the ears, his breath slowing as the dog's gentle warmth filled the room. Milo's comforting presence seemed to offer something the stranger hadn't felt in days: safety. For the first time, the stranger allowed himself a moment of peace. "I used to be an investigator," the man began, his voice breaking the silence. "I was working on a case, too close, maybe. I started to uncover something big, something dangerous. I didn't realize how deep it went, or how far they'd go to silence me." John listened, unable to interrupt, his eyes drawn to Milo, whose calm demeanor provided a strange kind of protection. Milo sat beside the stranger, his head tilted slightly as the man continued. "I've been on the run for days," the man continued, his eyes darkening. "Everywhere I go, I'm looking over my shoulder, and now you're in this too. I'm sorry, but I had no choice." The gravity of the stranger's words hung in the air. But even as danger loomed, the bond between Milo and the man had already begun to shift the mood. As the stranger reached out to pet Milo once more, the tension in his face softened. For a brief moment, there was no fear, no chase, just a small dog offering silent comfort in the midst of chaos. The night stretched on, the hours slipping by in a quiet, uneasy rhythm. The only sounds in the house were the occasional shifting of the stranger on the couch and the soft, rhythmic breathing of John. But beneath the comics, the tension remained thick, swirling in the air. Milo, once content and playful, had shifted gears entirely. The little French bulldog had moved from his spot beside John to the edge of the room, his body tense, eyes darting toward every window. He remained silent, but his alertness spoke volumes. His small frame seemed out of place for such a serious task, yet he moved with purpose, eyes never leaving the shadows outside the window. His ears twitched at every sound, every breeze that shifted the curtains, and with each subtle movement outside, Milo's focus sharpened further. His normally playful nature had been replaced by a quiet vigilance. John, watching the dog, couldn't help but feel the weight of the change. Just hours ago, Milo had been the lighthearted companion, keeping him grounded with his playful antics. But now, there was no mistaking it. Milo was on guard. His behavior was instinctual, the kind of protective nature that John hadn't realized the dog possessed so strongly. Milo wasn't just a pet, he was a silent sentinel, and every action, every shift in his body seemed to communicate that he wasn't just watching over John, but also the stranger, the man who had now become part of their world, however briefly. John could feel the unease creeping back into his chest as he glanced at the stranger. The man had fallen silent, staring into the space around him, but it was clear that even he had noticed the change in the atmosphere. Milo, despite the unfamiliarity of the situation, stayed close, near the door by the windows, constantly scanning. He wasn't leaving John's side. Whether the threat was real or imagined, Milo's protective instinct had taken over. The room felt small and confined, but Milo's presence at every corner, moving from one window to another, his eyes darting back to John for reassurance, gave John something important, a sense of security, as though Milo would stand his ground no matter what came through that door. It was as if the dog knew that in this house, this small family was worth protecting, and nothing, no matter how unfamiliar the situation, would stop him from doing just that. John sat back, his eyes lingering on the quiet interaction between Milo and the stranger. It was subtle, but it wasn't lost on him. As the minutes passed, Milo, with his gentle and unwavering presence, had begun to form an unexpected bond with the stranger. The dog, usually so devoted to John, had no hesitation in offering his comfort to the man who was once a complete stranger. John could see it in the way Milo sat beside him, nudging his hand, seeking nothing but the calming touch of a human. The stranger, once tense and guarded, now seemed to melt into the dog's warmth, his features softening under the dog's gentle affection. The sight of it hit John harder than he expected. Milo's instinct to trust, to love without fear, without hesitation, was something John had always admired, but now it was forcing him to confront something deep within himself. For years, John had kept his emotions in check. He built walls around his heart, walls so high that even those closest to him couldn't break through. The outside world was unpredictable, unreliable, and John had learned the hard way that trust wasn't something to give freely. He had long since sealed away any vulnerability, buried it beneath layers of self-protection. But now, watching Milo, a dog, extend the same trust he so carefully guarded to a man who had just walked into their lives, John's carefully constructed barriers began to tremble. He had always known Milo was different, but he hadn't realized how much the dog had trusted him. In this moment, it wasn't just that Milo was loyal to John. The dog's trust wasn't limited to just him. Milo saw the good in others, even in a stranger, and in doing so, he had unintentionally forced John to examine his own inability to open up, his own fear of vulnerability. John's throat tightened. He looked at Milo, who was now resting his head against the stranger's knee, calm and content. The contrast between the dog's effortless ability to trust and John's own guardedness stung. Was this what he had been missing all these years? The simple act of trusting others, of letting someone in? The realization hit John like a wave, and for the first time, he wondered if he could ever allow himself to trust again. He looked back at the stranger, who, for the first time that night, seemed at peace, comforted by Milo's presence. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for him to let go of some of the walls he had built around his heart. The night stretched on, its weight pressing down on the room as the minutes seemed to crawl by. John, sitting with his arms crossed, couldn't shake the feeling of unease that still lingered, despite the fleeting moments of calm. The stranger, now somewhat settled, had grown quieter, perhaps overwhelmed by the weight of his own fears. But Milo had not changed. Despite the tension, the little French bulldog remained a steady presence, his tail wagging intermittently as he moved between John and the stranger. It was almost as if the dog was perfectly in tune with the mood of the room, knowing exactly when to comfort John, when to offer the stranger his warmth. Milo's demeanor, playful yet soothing, never faltered, even as the air seemed to thicken with the unknown. John couldn't help but watch the dog closely. Here was a creature that, despite his small size, had a remarkable ability to adapt. The world outside was unpredictable, and this night was certainly no exception. But Milo had an unshakable resilience. From the moment the stranger had arrived, Milo's response had been immediate, cautious, then playful, and now a quiet confidence that seemed to reassure everyone in the room. John had always known Milo to be playful, but it was moments like this that revealed a deeper layer to the dog's character. Milo wasn't just adaptable in the sense that he could adjust to different environments. He was adaptable in a way that made him a bridge between two completely different worlds. His own quiet life with John, and now the intrusion of a stranger with a story too dangerous to comprehend. Milo didn't hesitate to move between John and the stranger, sensing their unspoken need for reassurance. A quick nudge here, a playful roll over there, as if to say, "It's okay. We're together. We can handle this." He brought comfort in the simplest ways, a lick to John's hand, a soft paw placed gently on the stranger's leg, asking for affection. Milo knew no barriers, no hesitation, and that ability to flow seamlessly between moments of play and moments of comfort was what made him special. John couldn't help but feel the weight of that realization. How could such a small creature possess such an immense capacity for adaptability? It was a quality John had long struggled to embrace in himself. Milo had no walls, no fears, no reluctance to trust. He was simply there, exactly as he was meant to be. The calm of the night shattered suddenly, a sound that cut through the silence like a knife. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing in the stillness of the house. John's heart skipped a beat, a cold rush of adrenaline surging through his veins. His eyes snapped toward the door, his mind racing with 1,000 scenarios. Who could it be? Were they here for the stranger? Was the danger now on their doorstep? The footsteps grew louder, closer. The air in the room seemed to freeze, the tension palpable as John's breath quickened. His hands clenched at his sides and his gaze flicked to the windows, to the shadows outside, but he could see nothing. Nothing but the darkness, as if the world outside had swallowed the light. Yet through the rising panic that gripped John, there was something else. Something reassuring. Milo. The little French bulldog, normally the first to react to any noise or movement, remained still. His small body was tense, his ears alert, but he didn't bark, didn't show the usual signs of alarm. Instead, Milo did something that surprised John. He stepped closer, gently pressing against his leg, and sat down, his eyes meeting John's. For a moment, everything seemed to slow. John could feel his pulse in his ears, but in the midst of the chaos inside his chest, Milo was calm. His gaze never left John's face, waiting for some kind of cue, some kind of direction. There was no fear in the dog's eyes, no anxiety, just a quiet, unspoken trust, as if he was saying, "I'm here, you're not alone." Milo's stillness, his patience, gave John the space to breathe. The footsteps outside continued, the sound growing louder as whoever it was neared the door. But instead of fear, John felt something else, a quiet sense of determination. Milo wasn't afraid. And in that moment, John realized something crucial. The dog's calmness, his unflinching loyalty, was the anchor he needed to hold on to. Milo, though small and seemingly insignificant in the face of whatever danger lurked outside, stood resolute. His unwavering presence beside John was a reminder that no matter what was coming, they would face it together. John reached down, gently petting Milo's head, his fingers brushing through the dog's soft fur. It was a silent promise. No matter what happened next, they had each other. And that was enough. Quiet was shattered by the creak of the door. It wasn't the sound of someone knocking, but the unmistakable sound of the door handle turning. John's breath caught in his throat as the room fell into an even more suffocating silence. His eyes snapped to the door, his body rigid with anticipation, but before he could make a move, Milo sprang into action. With surprising speed and determination, the small French bulldog darted toward the door. John's heart pounded in his chest as he watched Milo's little frame, usually so playful, now full of purpose and courage. There was no hesitation in the dog's movements, no fear of whatever danger lurked outside. As the door creaked again, Milo planted his paws firmly on the ground, and with a sharp, commanding bark, he asserted his presence. It wasn't the loud, frantic barking of a dog who felt threatened. It was the deep, steady bark of a protector. Milo's bark filled the room, bouncing off the walls, growing in intensity. It was a sound that made John's pulse race, but also gave him a strange sense of confidence. Milo wasn't just barking to alert them of danger. He was telling the world, in no uncertain terms, that he would not let anyone or anything harm his family. John's heart surged as he watched Milo. There was something in the dog's stance, something that spoke of pure bravery. Milo, despite his small size, stood his ground, eyes locked on the door, the unwavering determination in his gaze clear. John couldn't help but feel emboldened. The fear that had gripped him just moments ago seemed to fade as he watched Milo, this small, fearless creature, face whatever might be on the other side of that door. For the first time that night, John didn't feel so alone. Milo's courage was contagious. It spread through him, filling him with a strength he hadn't realized he needed. He took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the handle of the door. Milo was ready, and so was he. They were in this together, and no matter what came next, they would face it side by side. As Milo continued to bark, John knew one thing for certain. Whatever danger was coming their way, they would not back down. Together, they were stronger. Together, they would fight. The sound of a car pulling up outside sliced through the tension in the room. The engine's growl was unmistakable, and it sent a jolt of panic through the stranger. His eyes widened in horror, his breath coming in short gasps as his gaze darted nervously to the windows. His hands trembled, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he looked utterly helpless. The fear that had been simmering just beneath the surface finally broke free. "They're here," the stranger whispered, his voice shaky. "They found me." John could feel the stranger's panic building, his chest tightening with every labored breath the man took. For a moment, he could see the fear reflected in the man's eyes, the same fear that had gripped him earlier in the night. But now, something inside John shifted. The panic, the uncertainty. It was still there, but Milo's presence, calm and steady, gave him the strength to take control of the situation. John took a step closer to the stranger, his voice firm but reassuring. "Stay calm. They're not in yet. We'll deal with this." But it wasn't just John's words that had the power to soothe the stranger. It was Milo. The French Bulldog, despite the growing tension in the room, had not faltered. His playful demeanor hadn't changed. He hadn't stopped wagging his tail, hadn't stopped moving between John and the stranger with a lighthearted bounce, as if telling them that there was no reason to lose control, like no reason to panic. His soft eyes met the stranger's for a moment, and then, as if sensing the man's growing anxiety, Milo stepped forward and nudged his hand, offering a brief but comforting touch. The stranger, whose hand had been shaking just seconds ago, paused. For a moment, he stopped breathing so hard. Milo's playful nudge, his unwavering calmness, created a small space in the man's mind where the fear couldn't take over. It was a simple act, a small gesture, but it grounded them all. The stranger slowly exhaled, trying to steady his racing heart, and his trembling hands gradually relaxed. John watched the interaction with quiet awe. He had always been the one who tried to keep control, but it was Milo, with his unshakable trust and steady demeanor, who was teaching them both how to find peace amid chaos. And in that moment, John realized that no matter what was about to happen outside, they had Milo, a protector, a calming force, and a reminder that sometimes all you needed was the simplest of actions to break through the fear. The sound of the car outside had grown louder, the engines humming closer, and with it the tension in the room tightened. John's chest felt tight, his breath shallow as his mind raced. The stranger, once panicking, now sat frozen, his hands trembling uncontrollably. John's pulse thudded in his ears, drowning out everything else. The weight of the unknown, the looming danger outside seemed to close in on him. It was too much. The walls, the fear, the uncertainty, it all became overwhelming. In one swift motion, John crumpled to the floor, his knees buckling beneath him. He didn't even realize he was sitting until he was already there. The room felt too small, too suffocating, and he couldn't escape the pressure building inside him. His hands gripped the floor, his body shaking slightly as he tried to breathe, but the air felt thick and heavy. For a moment, John thought he might lose control completely. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. Milo. Without hesitation, the little French bulldog trotted over to him, sensing the sudden shift in his owner's mood. Milo's small body brushed against John's side, his warmth seeping into John's tense frame. The dog didn't bark, didn't nudge, or jump. He simply sat down beside him, steady and firm, like a quiet anchor in the storm of emotions swirling inside John. Milo's calm presence was like a balm to John's frayed nerves. He felt the dog's soft fur against his leg, and instinctively, John reached out a hand to pet him. The warmth of Milo's body, the simple comfort of the dog sitting beside him, grounded him. Milo looked up at him, his dark eyes filled with a quiet understanding, and then, as if on cue, the little dog licked John's face, his soft tongue brushing across his cheek. It wasn't much, a small act really, but it was enough. The gesture broke through the walls of panic that had been closing in on John. A chuckle escaped his lips, shaky but real. For a brief moment, the fear that had gripped him melted away, replaced by a sense of peace he hadn't felt in hours. He ran his fingers through Milo's soft fur, grounding himself in the simple act of care and companionship. In that moment, it didn't matter what was outside or what the future held. All that mattered was the connection between him and Milo, and that was enough to face whatever came next. The stranger's hand trembled as he reached into his pocket for his phone, his fingers unsteady and cold. His mind raced with the need for help. He needed to contact someone, anyone, to get him out of this mess. His heart hammered in his chest, and for a moment the phone felt like the only lifeline he had left. He tried to steady himself, his thumb hovering over the screen, ready to dial. But just as his thumb was about to press the first number, he froze. His eyes shifted from the phone screen to John, who was still sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. Milo, the little French bulldog, was sitting by John's side, offering him steady comfort. The dog's quiet presence was almost palpable, and as the stranger watched, Milo gently licked John's face, his small, comforting gesture cutting through the tension in the room like a hot knife through butter. John's breathing had slowed. His shoulders, once tight with panic, had relaxed. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. The stranger couldn't look away. He saw how Milo's calm energy had grounded John, how the simple act of being near him had erased the overwhelming fear that had gripped him just moments before. For the first time that night, the stranger felt a flicker of hope, something he hadn't allowed him to feel for days. He looked down at the phone in his hand. His mind had been consumed with the need for immediate action, for a quick escape, but now, something about the way John was leaning into Milo's warmth, finding solace in the dog's presence, made him reconsider. Maybe there was another way. Maybe they didn't need outside help. Not right now. The calming power of the small dog, so unassuming but so effective, had planted a seed of hope that he couldn't ignore. For the first time in a long while, the stranger began to believe that there was still some goodness in the world. That perhaps there was still hope for him. The fear that had nearly consumed him seemed to recede, replaced by a cautious optimism. It was as if, in that moment, Milo had done something miraculous. He had reminded the stranger that not everything was lost. There was still the chance of peace, of safety, of healing. It wasn't gone. Not yet. As the hours passed, the stillness in the house felt suffocating, the tension lingering like a storm about to break. The night seemed to stretch on forever. John had moved from the floor to the couch, his eyes flicking between the door and the windows, the unsettling sounds of the outside world pressing against the walls. The air felt heavy with uncertainty, each moment filled with the possibility of danger. The stranger sat on the other side of the room, his eyes constantly shifting, still on edge, waiting for something to happen. But through it all, one thing remained constant: Milo. The small French bulldog, despite the danger lurking outside, never left John's side. No matter how tense the room became, no matter how much the fear threatened to overwhelm John, Milo stayed. He was more than just a pet. He was a lifeline. Milo didn't flinch at the noises, didn't bark or act in alarm. Instead, he curled up beside John, his body warm and solid against his leg. His steady presence was a reminder that, despite the chaos outside, there was still something simple, something pure, that could not be shaken. The dog's loyalty was unwavering, his bond with John unbreakable. Milo wasn't just sitting by John for comfort. He was standing guard, silently watching over him, alert to every movement, but never moving away. At times, when the silence became too much to bear, Milo would shift slightly. His tail giving a soft thump against the floor, a playful nudge against John's hand. It was a small act, but it broke through the tension, reminding John to breathe, to stay grounded. Milo's playfulness, his wagging tail, his quiet nudges, his gentle licks provided an emotional anchor that kept John tethered to something beyond the fear. The dog's joy, even in the midst of such uncertainty, became a lifeline, offering brief moments of lightness in a world that felt heavy with danger. John looked down at Milo, his heart swelling with gratitude. The dog had given him something he hadn't realized he needed, a reminder that even in the most uncertain of times, loyalty, love, and playfulness could still exist. Milo's unshakable presence helped John navigate through the storm. Even in the darkest moments, Milo was there, steadfast, loyal, and always ready to bring a smile when it seemed impossible. The stillness of the room was shattered in an instant. The door, which had remained closed for what seemed like hours, suddenly burst open with a deafening crash. The force of it rattled the walls as a group of intimidating men, faces masked and eyes filled with malice, stormed into the room. John's heart skipped a beat, the fear he'd been holding at bay rushing back with a vengeance. His instincts screamed to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The men were in, and there was no turning back. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. John's mind raced, trying to find a way out, but then, just as quickly as they had entered, the tension in the room shifted. A small, determined bark pierced through the chaos. Milo. Without a second thought, the French Bulldog leaped from his position beside John and charged toward the intruders. His small body was a blur of energy, his tail stiff and his stance unwavering. He may have been small, but in that moment, he was a force of nature. With surprising speed and fury, Milo ran headfirst into the group of men, barking furiously as he lunged toward the first man in his path. The men paused, taken aback by the dog's sudden attack. They had expected fear. They had expected a quiet, helpless family to cower in the face of danger. But instead, they were met with a relentless little dog, his courage far outweighing his size. Milo's bark echoed off the walls, full of purpose, as if he were telling the men that they would not harm his family. Not on his watch. John watched, stunned, as Milo's bravery became a shield. The little dog, despite his size, was fearless, his every movement an act of defiance. He darted between the men's legs, nipping at their heels, making it impossible for them to approach John or the stranger without dealing with him first. His growls were low and menacing, his eyes locked on each intruder as he took them on one by one. John's heart swelled with pride and awe. Here was this small creature, putting his entire being into protecting them. Milo wasn't just a pet, he was a protector, a warrior in his own right. His bravery, his loyalty were the very things that kept John grounded. In the face of overwhelming danger, Milo's courage reminded John that together they could face anything. The room erupted into chaos. The intruders, momentarily stunned by Milo's bold charge, regained their composure quickly, but the little dog didn't give them a chance to regroup. His small, nimble body darted between their legs, faster than they could react. With every step, Milo's playful antics took on a new form, a calculated distraction. He didn't stop barking, his high-pitched yelps filling the room, but it was his movements that truly threw the men off balance. Milo ran in quick, tight circles around the intruders, weaving in and out like a whirlwind. His tail wagged furiously, and his little feet moved with a frantic energy, making it impossible for the men to focus on anything else. His playful nature, usually reserved for games with John, now became a weapon in a life-or-death situation. The intruders, confused by the relentless energy of the small dog, stumbled over each other as they tried to catch him. They couldn't focus, couldn't anticipate his next move. He was everywhere at once, creating a flurry of movement, a whirlwind of distractions. John's eyes widened as he realized what Milo was doing. The small dog wasn't just playing, he was buying them time. He was giving John and the stranger the chance to make their move. Milo's quick thinking had turned the tables, forcing the intruders to focus on him instead of the vulnerable people in the room. John grabbed the stranger's arm, his heart pounding in his chest. "Go," he whispered urgently, his voice filled with determination. Together, they made a break for the back door, moving as quietly and quickly as they could. As they stepped into the hallway, John risked one last glance back into the living room. Milo was still at it, racing circles around the intruders, his bark echoing through the house, keeping the men's attention firmly on him. The stranger, once on edge and paralyzed by fear, now found his legs moving, urged on by the energy Milo had created. With the door between them and the intruders, John allowed himself a moment of relief. Milo's quick thinking and adaptability had saved the day. His playful nature, once just a source of joy, had become their lifeline. The small dog had proven that, in the face of danger, even the most unexpected behaviors could turn the tide in their favor. And for the first time that night, John felt the weight of the situation lift, knowing they had a fighting chance thanks to Milo. John and the stranger sprinted through the narrow hallway, their footsteps barely making a sound as they rushed toward the back door. The weight of the moment pressed down on John's chest, but the urgent need to escape pushed him forward. His heart raced, and the stranger, now equally determined, kept pace beside him. They reached the door, and John threw it open with a force that made it creak on its hinges. For a brief second, John hesitated, glancing back toward the house. In that split moment, his eyes found Milo. The little French bulldog was still inside, standing firm, his small body planted in front of the intruders. His tail was stiff, his ears perked, and his eyes locked onto the group of men who had already begun to regroup. Milo was alone in the face of danger, but his resolve was unwavering. He wasn't running. He wasn't retreating. He was protecting his family with everything he had. John's breath caught in his throat, but before he could move back inside, Milo took action. With a bark so fierce it shook the air, Milo lunged toward the intruders. His small frame may have seemed like an easy target, but his courage was undeniable. He charged forward again and again, barking relentlessly as he darted between the men, keeping their attention firmly on him. It was a distraction, a crucial one. Milo's aim wasn't to fight them directly. It was to buy John the precious time he needed to get away. The men, frustrated and confused by the relentless barking and the dog's quick movements, struggled to maintain control. Milo weaved through their legs, nipping at their heels, forcing them to focus on him rather than pursue John and the stranger. With each bark, Milo stood his ground. He was small, but his heart was enormous, and he wasn't backing down. John watched from the doorway, heart in his throat, as the minutes stretched on. He knew the danger wasn't over, but as he saw Milo standing firm, refusing to let the intruders get any closer, he felt a deep surge of gratitude. The little dog was their hero. His bravery and selflessness had bought them the time they needed to escape. As they disappeared into the night, John's gaze remained fixed on the door, knowing that no matter what happened next, Milo had ensured their survival. His courage, his love, and his unyielding loyalty had saved the day. The sounds of chaos slowly faded as the intruders, disoriented and thwarted by Milo's relentless courage, retreated into the night. The tension in the house began to dissipate, but the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on John's chest. His body was tense, his mind racing, but in his arms, Milo was calm. The small dog, once full of energy and fury, had settled into a quiet, trusting stillness. John cradled him close, his hands shaking slightly as he held the little dog against him. The danger was over, but the emotions were far from settled. John looked down at Milo, his heart swelling with gratitude. The small dog had not only protected him, but had saved their lives. Without hesitation, without fear, Milo had stood up against the men who had threatened their safety. His courage and loyalty had been the difference between life and death. In that moment, John realized just how much this dog meant to him. With a deep breath, John whispered softly to Milo, "Thank you. You're more than just a pet, you're family." His voice was thick with emotion, the words barely escaping as his eyes filled with tears. Milo, sensing the change in John's demeanor, seemed to understand. He nuzzled closer to John's chest, his warm body a soothing balm against the rawness of the moment. And then, as if to reassure John, Milo did what he did best. He licked John's face in his signature playful way. The dog's familiar gesture, so simple and yet so full of meaning, grounded John in the moment. The wet lick on his cheek, The soft nudge of Milo's nose, it was a reminder that they had made it through, together. The fear that had once gripped him seemed to melt away as Milo's love and loyalty enveloped him. In that brief moment, John was reminded of the bond they shared, a bond that went beyond words, beyond the danger, beyond the fear. John smiled softly, his eyes still moist. He ran his fingers through Milo's fur, gently scratching behind his ears. The little dog's tail gave a small, contented wag, and the world seemed to settle back into place. The storm had passed, the threat had been neutralized, and in Milo's arms, John found the strength to keep moving forward. Together, they were unstoppable. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the world outside seemed to exhale, the stillness of the night finally giving way to a calmer morning. The air, once thick with tension and fear, now felt different, lighter, more hopeful. The battle was over, and the threat had been neutralized, but John, still holding Milo close, felt something shift within himself. Sitting quietly by the window, John looked down at the small dog in his arms, the very same dog who had bravely protected him throughout the night, who had stood firm when the world felt like it was falling apart. John had been through so much in the last few hours, fear, uncertainty, and near loss, but in that moment, as Milo's steady presence grounded him, John realized something important. He had been given a second chance. Not just to survive, but to live fully, to trust again. Milo, as always, was beside him, his small body warm against John's side. The dog looked up at him, his eyes filled with a quiet affection that seemed to say, "We made it." John couldn't help but smile, his heart swelling with gratitude. Milo wasn't just a pet, he was family. They had been through something extraordinary together, something that tested both of them in ways they hadn't imagined. But they had come out the other side stronger, bonded in a way that words couldn't capture. John reflected on the incredible loyalty, bravery, and love that Milo had shown throughout the night. No matter the danger, no matter how overwhelming the odds seemed, Milo had been there, unwavering and true. And in that moment, John realized that he wasn't alone. Not now, not ever. Milo had shown him what true trust looked like, what it meant to face the unknown with courage, and how powerful love and loyalty could be in even the darkest moments. As they stepped out the door into the new day, John felt the weight of the night lift from his shoulders. He looked down at Milo, and the two of them walked side by side, ready to face whatever the future held. The world seemed brighter, and the unknown no longer something to fear. With Milo by his side, John knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together, united by the strength of their bond, their loyalty, bravery, and love. And for the first time in a long while, John walked forward with a sense of peace, knowing that they had everything they needed to face the world.